Reed Colton never asked to be in a fight. He was the kind of man who liked quiet land, long views, and the kind of work that left his hands rough but his heart at ease. His family had owned the 500-acre ranch for generations, tucked between pine-covered ridgelines and wide western skies in Colorado. The place was remote, beyond the edges of subdivisions and shopping centers, far from HOA newsletters and neon-lit sidewalks. It was peaceful, pure. His inheritance, yes, but more than that, it was his identity. The first sign of trouble wasn't dramatic. It was a gravel road that hadn't been there last fall. Reed noticed it cutting through the lower field near the creek bed. At first, he assumed it belonged to a utility crew or maybe county workers. But when he traced its path, it didn't stop. It pushed deeper, right through his land, curling like a scar across the hills. Then came the construction equipment. Then came foundations. Then rooftops. It didn't feel real. He drove down to the site in his pickup, stunned into silence at what he saw. Partially built homes, a half-finished parking lot, and a sign that read, Eagle Ridge Extension, luxury homes from the $700s. There was no permit posted, no contact number. He checked his glove box, pulled out a worn copy of the original land survey his grandfather had passed down, and parked next to a bulldozer. He walked straight through the framing of what looked like it would be a model home and demanded answers. A foreman tried to deflect at first, saying he was just following plans. He handed Reed a binder with development maps, none of which bore Reed's name. There was no purchase, no easement, no authorization. They were building on his land, and no one had asked. He returned to his ranch that evening angry, confused, and already reaching for the number of a land use attorney a neighbor had once recommended. That was when he found the letter on his porch. It was printed on thick white paper, embossed in gold with a mountain-shaped logo and the name, Eagle Ridge HOA. Inside was a notice stating that he owed $18,450 in past due HOA assessments and had violated community standards by failing to maintain approved architectural conformity. The words didn't make sense. He wasn't part of any HOA. No one had ever voted, signed, or sold a single square foot of his land. The envelope may as well have come from Mars, but Reed recognized the name at the bottom. Karen Browning, president of the Eagle Ridge HOA. He had met her once, at a town development meeting 2 years prior, when he'd raised concerns about the sprawl of new homes creeping toward his borders. She was sharp, smug, and spoke in the clipped tone of someone used to being obeyed. Back then, she dismissed his concerns with a rehearsed smile and a business card he never asked for. Now, it seemed, she had come back in full force. Within days, Reed's mailbox was full of similar notices, fines for unapproved fencing, encroachments, and even accusations that he was illegally occupying community land. He laughed at first, but when he found all 4 tires of his truck slashed one morning, and a copy of the same HOA notice jammed under the windshield wiper, he stopped laughing. The next day, Reed sat down across from his attorney, Merrick Hargrove, a straight-talking former federal prosecutor with a soft spot for underdogs. Together they combed through maps, titles, county records, and boundary surveys. There was no question, Reed's property had never been annexed, sold, or signed over. The construction on his land was entirely illegal, and the HOA had no jurisdiction. What's more, the families buying these half-built homes had no idea they were purchasing property on stolen land. Merrick didn't blink. He filed a cease and desist letter within 24 hours. He followed it with a formal demand for $2.5 million in damages, the estimated value of the land currently being developed. Included was a satellite photo highlighting every illegal structure built past the boundary line, each one marked like a target. Karen Browning responded with arrogance. She claimed the HOA had assumed control of all adjacent Greenbelt property under their Community Expansion Charter, a document with no legal standing, signed only by board members and filed nowhere official. She continued threatening fines. She mocked Reed in a community email, calling him a bitter legacy owner who was resisting progress. But Merrick had built cases against people more dangerous than Karen Browning. And he wasn't going to blink now. He filed suit. Reed was the plaintiff. The HOA was the defendant. Karen was named personally. The courtroom was packed on the first day of trial. Developers sat stiffly in rows behind Karen, while Reed sat quietly with a folder of black and white photos, county records, and family deeds going back to 1957. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman named Harmon, had no patience for theatrics. Over the next week, Merrick built a precise, devastating case. He showed the original deed. He brought in a county official to testify that no subdivision applications had been approved. He presented aerial photos of Reed's untouched land from 6 months prior, contrasted with current drone footage showing newly poured sidewalks and street lamps. Karen tried to defend herself with circular logic and irrelevant bylaws. Her attorney flailed. She admitted under cross-examination that no permission had been granted by Reed for the use of his land, and that she never verified title transfer before initiating construction. She even confirmed she'd authorized the HOA to begin billing Reed for back dues, despite knowing he was not a member. The final blow came when Merrick introduced an internal HOA email, obtained legally, where Karen explicitly wrote, "We'll move fast before the rancher gets lawyers involved." Judge Harmon didn't hesitate. She ruled in Reed's favor on all counts. The HOA was ordered to pay $2.3 million in damages. Reed was granted the right to demolish all structures built on his property, with full control of the timeline and method. Karen Browning was barred from holding any HOA leadership position in the future and held personally liable for civil damages. She left the courtroom pale and speechless, but for Reed, the battle wasn't about money. It was about principle. About protecting the land that had been in his family for generations. Land that couldn't be priced, only respected. The silence on the ranch felt different after the verdict. It was no longer the calm of solitude, but the quiet that follows a storm, where everything stands still just long enough for you to realize it's over. Reed Colton stood near the ridge overlooking the lower fields where the road once carved through his pasture, a thin white scar of concrete disrupting the natural slope of the land. For months, he had watched as heavy machines trespassed, homes rose on soil that wasn't theirs, and fences sliced through earth he'd walked since childhood. Now, the land was his again, but not in memory. In law. In full. The court order gave him complete authority to demolish every illegal structure the Eagle Ridge HOA had built on his property. He could have waited, let time do the healing. But Reed didn't believe in waiting for wrongs to fade. He believed in fixing them. And in his mind, nothing would be truly repaired until every brick, every poured foundation, every last nail hammered by arrogance was pulled from the ground. He started the demolition quietly. No press. No grand announcement. He simply hired a private crew he trusted, men who understood the job wasn't just about removal. It was about restoration. The first to go was the road. It was jackhammered and ripped out like a tumor. Then came the framed houses, skeletal shells stripped of their stolen promise. Every window shattered under sledgehammers. Every beam came down under the weight of justice. Neighbors began to notice. Some watched in silence from their driveways. Others, those who had unknowingly bought homes on the illegally developed land, approached Reed in shame, confusion, and fear. Most were honest people, families, who thought they were buying a future, only to realize they had been sold a lie. Reed didn't gloat. He didn't yell. He simply pointed to the boundary markers, explained the truth, and gave them copies of the court decision. You can replace this text with any text you wish. You can either write in this text box or paste your own text here. Try different languages and voices. Change the speed and the pitch of the A. Few were angry. One man, face red with frustration, accused Reed of destroying people's lives. Reed didn't flinch. He calmly replied, "You built your life on land that wasn't yours. Now I'm taking mine back." The words hung heavy in the air. Others, to his surprise, thanked him. They'd lived under the HOA's rule for years, suffocated by fines, secret votes, and unchallengeable decisions. Karen Browning's brand of leadership hadn't just stolen Reed's land, it had stolen their peace. When her lies were exposed in court, it gave others the courage to speak up. Rumors swirled about Karen's disappearance. Some said she moved to Arizona. Others claimed she was sued again in another district. A few believed she had quietly changed her name. Reed didn't care. For him, she was a shadow that had finally passed. What mattered now was the cleanup. By the end of the second week, the land had changed. What had once been streets, homes, and construction chaos was now open soil again, bare, muddy, raw, but honest. It wasn't pretty, but it was real. Reed planted cover grass in the spring, scattered native seeds from an old sack his father used to keep in the barn. He pulled out irrigation pipes that had no business being there. Where concrete footings had been, he laid fresh dirt, then walked it himself, barefoot, to feel the difference. That summer, he threw a barbecue. Not just any barbecue, a celebration of freedom. He didn't print flyers or post online. He just sent word around town the old-fashioned way. A visit to the feed store, a call to the diner, a quiet mention at the co-op. The invitation was simple. Come eat, come laugh, come see the land free again. And they came. Old ranchers, new families, construction workers, teachers, even a few of the former HOA residents who'd chosen to stay in the part of the subdivision untouched by the scandal. Reed grilled ribs over mesquite wood, laid out folding tables filled with cornbread, brisket, potato salad, and lemonade. Children ran along the now open field. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years sat at picnic tables and traded stories, not about property lines or bylaws, but about life. Someone brought a guitar. Another brought a pie. By sunset, the ranch echoed with music, laughter, and the unmistakable sound of community being reborn. When one of the guests raised a toast and called Reed a hero, he shook his head. "I'm no hero. I just didn't roll over." He meant it. But they clinked their glasses anyway. That night, as the fire pits burned low and guests started heading home, one young man lingered behind. He was in his early 20s, clean-cut, nervous. Reed noticed the way he kept looking at the fence line. "Did I help you with something?" Reed asked. The young man nodded. "My family almost bought one of those homes. My mom was all in. Signed the offer sheet and everything. We were lucky. We backed out at the last second. When we heard what happened, I just wanted to say thank you." Reed gave a slow nod. "You're welcome." The kid hesitated. "What made you fight them? Most folks would have just given up." Reed looked out over his land. The moonlight caught the edges of the field, softening everything it touched. He thought about his grandfather's boots, his mother's quiet prayers, the paper deed that still hung in a frame near the kitchen window. "Because if you don't stand up," he said, "they'll think you never had a right to sit down." The seasons changed, but the land remembered. Where broken concrete once lay, grass grew again. Where illegal fences had boxed out freedom, wildflowers now bloomed. Reed Colton continued his work as he always had, quiet, consistent, with a deliberate care that came from knowing the value of what was his. But even as his days returned to routine, the impact of what he had done began reaching far beyond the ranch's borders. People didn't stop talking. News of the court ruling spread across Colorado and into neighboring states. Property rights blogs ran think pieces. Local news anchors framed the story with bold headlines like, "Rancher beats HOA in multi-million-dollar land dispute," and "The man who took his land back." But what made the difference wasn't the media. It was what came next. At first, a few emails. Then phone calls. Strangers reaching out, not because they wanted to congratulate Reed, but because they needed help. Landowners who were being pushed by their HOAs. People who had received strange notices, threats, fines they didn't understand. Others who, like Reed, had discovered developers building closer and closer, pressing against old fences with the assumption that nobody would say no. Reed didn't consider himself an expert. He hadn't wanted to be anyone's symbol. But he knew how it felt to be alone in that fight. So, when a young woman from Idaho sent him a message asking if she could visit and see how he fought back, he said yes. Then an older man from Arizona. A couple from Montana. One by one, they came, curious, desperate, hopeful. He didn't start an organization. He didn't want a foundation. What he did was pull out a folding table under the tree near his barn and lay down copies of court filings, land surveys, and the cease and desist letter that had stopped the Eagle Ridge HOA in its tracks. He talked people through the process, showed them how to request their property records, told them what to ask their lawyer, reminded them to document everything. Word spread. Eventually, a local lawyer who had followed Reed's case offered to help formalize these. Ran side workshops. They created a small nonprofit, modest, underfunded, but effective. It was called Lines That Hold. Its mission was simple: to help private landowners protect themselves from predatory HOAs and developers. It didn't take long before the nonprofit had a waiting list. Meanwhile, Eagle Ridge, the HOA that once threatened Reed's home, was a shadow of its former self. Karen Browning never returned. After her legal defeat, she quietly disappeared from the community, and investigations into her past behavior revealed a long pattern of power abuse. Civil suits followed. She was formally banned from serving in any leadership capacity in any registered HOA in the state. The new board of Eagle Ridge issued a formal apology to Reed. They offered a financial settlement to cover damages that exceeded what the court ordered. Reed declined the extra money but accepted the apology. "Fix your fences," he told them. "That's enough." What surprised Reed most wasn't the legal victory, or even the changes in Eagle Ridge. It was the way his community had grown stronger through the confrontation. People who had once kept to themselves were now stopping to check on one another. Barriers that had existed, not just physical, but social, had come down. The land dispute had reminded everyone of something simple but essential. They lived next to each other, not above each other. The state legislature eventually invited Reed to speak at a hearing on proposed HOA reforms. He wore jeans and boots to the Capitol building, standing out among the suits and ties. When he took the microphone, he didn't read from notes. He spoke like he always had, plain, honest, and unafraid. "I'm not here because I hate HOAs. I'm here because mine forgot where their property stopped and mine began. If the law hadn't stood behind me, I'd have lost everything. That shouldn't happen to anyone." The room went quiet. Then came the applause, not thunderous, but genuine. Lawmakers nodded. A bill was later passed requiring all HOAs in the state to publicly post their boundary maps and prove consent before extending jurisdiction. They called it the Colton Provision. Back home, Reed marked the edge of his land with something new. A wooden sign, carved by hand, mounted to a post along the trail where the illegal road once cut through. It read, "Here the line was crossed. Here the line held." It didn't just serve as a reminder to outsiders. It was for Reed too. A mark of where he had drawn a boundary not just on the land, but in his life. Where he had said no and meant it. Where he had stood, fought, and reclaimed what generations before him had protected. He didn't see himself as different than before. He still got up before dawn, still fed the horses, still walked his land with a mug of coffee and a worn pair of boots. But the ranch wasn't just a ranch anymore. It was a place where power had been tested and put in its place. And for every letter he received, every knock on the door from someone asking how to fight back, Reed gave the same answer. "You start by knowing where your line is, then you make damn sure they know too." Voice. You can even tweak the SSML, speech synthesis markup language, to control how the different sections of the text sound. Click on SSML above to give it a try. Enjoy using text-to-speech